No Rest for the Wicked is here and in early access as of April 18th, and it is developed by Moon Studios, who brought us the cute and cuddly and unforgettable Ori, which had us cry in the opening 5 minutes, and then the follow-up with Will of the Wisps, which was a fantastic sequel. So to say I'm pretty excited to try this out is an understatement, but don't get me wrong, this won't be cute and light, it will be messy and dark. This is a first impressions view where I'll be going through the gameplay basics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly, like this guy. And as a reminder, this is an early access title, so the feedback within I hope will help the devs too, and I will send it on. So let's go. So it's an ARPG, essentially drawing inspiration from the likes of even Dark Souls with well-known ARPGs like Diablo, Path of Exile, Lost Ark, etc. Just without the large clutter of enemies, as it wants to focus on the more difficult aspect and intense aspect of the combat. At the time of making this vid, I played for around 10 hours. Essentially a race that's able to take on the pestilence, which is some cataclysmic, plague-like event that is corrupting everyone. So far, nothing quite original. Many games have done a similar premise in the past. But on top of this, we have some political intrigue, which the game's story supposedly will lean into a lot. So this could get interesting. Okay, so on to character customization. So it's pretty basic, serviceable really. You can choose male or female, and the structure of the characters is quite strange. I'm not really sure what they're going for, but I guess it's distorted on purpose for the art style, and possibly there are a different race of people, so similar to human but not quite. But why does the man skip leg day, and where is his ass? That's all I want to know. The female has it all, dump truck included. You can change the face, the hair, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, jawbone. There's sliders and some colors to choose from. Very basic. The tutorial starts with us on the ship that comes under siege, and the game does a decent job with the basics such as destructible objects that may reveal hidden loot or paths, encouraging players to destroy a lot of furniture and scenery on the journey. The art style and graphics are gorgeous throughout this game in the last 10 hours I've been playing, and I see a lot of potential for the game, so that's good. After a quick cutscene, we are told about inventory, and I can tell you after the hours I've played for this first impressions, inventory management will be crucial and is a little unfair earlier on, but gets a lot more manageable after completing a certain quest to get your house, which I did on my live stream, but more on that later. For now, we have a few inventory tabs where loot will get divided into depending on if it's equipment or another resource. So with combat is simply press or hold down one button. For a PlayStation controller like I was using, it was square to do a regular or charge attack. Charge attacks deal more damage, as you can probably imagine. Combat involves basically trading blows for blows. The good thing is the combat feels very weighty, and I think it needs to be. And it does a good job with it. And this is where the stamina comes into play, which is our tiny green wheel akin to the Zelda Breath of the Wild, and it's a little difficult to see, so I think they could make this a little bit more obvious, because relying on a circle this small as it's top down, it feels a little off, or maybe increasing the size a little bit more is needed. It's good to have it near you so you can keep your eyes on the action, but it needs to be more noticeable in my opinion. Most games put it under the health bar in a corner, for example, so it does work. Both could work. And doing anything outside of regular movement in battle will quickly, and I emphasize quickly, drain your stamina. And outside of combat, thankfully, sprinting doesn't drain it, which is a good quality of life from many games, but it does decrease when performing actions such as climbing or swimming, and stamina does need a bit of a fine tune over the course of early access, as I feel you lose it far too fast. Everything just costs way too much stamina, it feels. Blocking, if you have a shield, will prevent the damage or reduce it depending on the enemy attack. And you can also do parries, which can be performed if you watch the swings of the enemy and just time it just right, just like you would in a Souls game, for example, and it will stagger them briefly, leaving them open to attack. Not visceral attacks like in the Dark Souls series, for example, which I think is something they could try to implement here, as I feel the reward isn't punishing enough for the risk involved. Most of the time I found out I was out of stamina to really punish the enemy back. You're pretty much only going to get 1 or 2 attacks before you find yourself backing off again to try and actually gain your stamina back. And this is probably because on particularly particularly big enemies and bosses, I find the telegraphing of abilities is not very obvious sometimes, and one criticism would be to look into the enemy telegraphing attacks a bit more, especially where parrying is involved. And the fact that attacks hurt a lot in this game. Any enemy with a huge weapon seems to be an issue with telegraphing, or how long range the attack can actually be. Because if you get hit, you are gonna most likely get very, very, very goddamn hurt. Now, enemies have a white poise bar underneath their health, which increases when you damage them, and they can be staggered when it's full. Enemies can also knock you down in combat and can get a little bit messy when there's multiple enemies on screen, and you can also lock onto enemies in the menu settings. I do find the game works a lot better when it's one-on-one or maybe 1 versus 2 enemies, but outside of that it does get very tricky and messy. And sometimes you can also sneak up on smaller enemies and catch them off guard for a backstab to remove a huge chunk of their health, or maybe even outright kill them, so you don't always need to charge into battle. However, charging in itself into battle by sprinting is a form of attack, and you can combo by doing this. And then you have your quintessential dodging like any Souls game to help you avoid damage entirely, which is most of what I had to do since most of the time I have a two-handed weapon. Weight will also come into this like Dark Souls with heavyweight, meaning that you do fat rolls, but you also can use your heavyweight to do a shoulder barge to stun enemies back, and even push them back, should I say. So it's not all bad news. And if you get encumbered by wearing too much, you won't be able to really move anyway. So it's up to you and your playstyle pretty much here. So for now, those are the combat basics. And for the opening hours, it's quite repetitive. However, it does open up more, but we will talk about that very soon. You'll also be using the environment a lot to traverse around. So climbing and jumping and even shimmying across narrow ledges will be the norm. So far, the level loops around nicely with unlocking shortcuts from doors to ladders dropping or activating bridges and elevators. The areas so far are well connected and complex enough, with the areas changing ever so slightly when the fog of war is activated again in an area. So once you explore it, it will actually be a little bit different with different enemy layouts and even loot. The checkpoint system is known as whispers in the game, and is used quite sparingly. You also get sent back to these whispers when you die, and whispers eventually allow fast travel to and from the main hub, more on that later, but only to the last visited whisper, so planning ahead is crucial to not need to backtrack, which I find is a bit too restrictive. Maybe this opens up later though, I'm not too sure yet. Every so often there will be light platforming sections, and sometimes more dangerously, they will be from so high up, or even over a pit of death. And yes, this game does have fall damage, and yes, it is quite punishing. I've died plenty of times so far just due to fall damage alone, which walking across narrow beams top down is harder than it looks, people, with the camera angle. Or maybe I'm sprinting too close to an edge and my character automatically jumps off, which will bring me very shortly to the remapping of buttons, because where I draw a criticism on the controls scheme is you can sprint and also climb, roll, and automatically mount terrain, which is all with one button, which can lead to some very silly deaths, particularly with just jumping off terrain outright, you know? I think they could possibly lessen this impact to smooth out the damage somewhat here, and you just know there's enemies waiting to charge at you to knock you off too, right? Because of course it is. And speaking of deaths, you lose durability when you die. Not experience, thankfully, but repair costs do add up fast as durability is lost fast. And that honestly could also look at balancing, because it just gets a bit too expensive, and it just the fact you have to run back to town a little bit more often is probably not a good thing. Outside of all of that, you can gather resources out in the world to level up your merchants and the city of Sacrament, which is your main hub, presumably for the entire game at least. They will also be needed to craft things. You'll also be able to do mining, fishing, logging, even digging. Seems to be the 4 introduced so far. I don't know if there's going to be more than that. And I really feel the durability loss here could be reduced as you get a few trees down before your axe needs repair. And trees in particular are the most time consuming to chop. Like a level 2 tree, or I think it's called a spruce tree, with a regular copper axe, which is the first axe you get in the game, takes around 20 seconds. And that is just like not acceptable and it's completely boring. And yes, you can eventually get the next upgrade of tools to speed this up considerably, but it's just, it's downright boring. Like I usually will just hold down a button and go on my phone. And that's not exact throughout it. I had a similar issue when I was playing Lost Ark. Like I think 3 to 5 seconds maximum is all it should take to get these resources, so you can get back to the most fun parts. I think they do have a very good game here, but these type of issues do hamper it. But hey, look, it's early access. We cannot expect a fully polished 1.0 release, and we should not expect such a 1.0 release right off the gate, that type of polish. Remember guys, Baldur's Gate 3 spent 3 years in early access and eventually came out to win the plethora of rewards that it did during 2023. So look, this is a work in progress. So I would possibly suggest waiting a few months before picking this up, maybe for a smoother experience. But with all that said and done, once you get to Sacrament, you can get daily quests and weekly quests to net some extra money, experience, and rewards. When you level up, you also spend 3 attribute points to level up your stats, one of which is Focus. Now, Focus is this game's mana, essentially. You build it by attacking, blocking, parrying enemies. You can even get some potions to rebuild it too. And then you spend this on magic or abilities that are etched into your weapons in the form of runes, which you can also extract, similar to how the legendary powers are extracted in Diablo Immortal or even Diablo 4. And yes, I do shudder at saying the name Diablo. It doesn't have the best representation or reputation, even, either one. But look, it's only a reference I had at this moment. Now, this rounds out the combat with your attacking, your parrying, blocking, dodging, your focus use, and even item use to buff yourself up, or imbuing your weapon with a status effect or element to aim at enemy weaknesses or throw things at enemies. Also with this, you get to slot gems into your gear or enhance gear further to get some benefits at the cost of rune and gem slots, and potentially even a negative enchant. And as mentioned earlier, you can get a house and even buy multiple plots in the main hub and decorate it and craft within, but most importantly, more storage, which is a gigantic pain in the ass with the amount of resources and reagents you find for the various crafter merchants in the game, and you may not even know what you need them for, so you're going to hold on to them because you just don't want to throw them out or even sell them. So maybe they can reduce the clutter a bit. There just seems to be a bit too many reagents and resources at the moment. Maybe even streamline it a bit more in the beginning. And speaking of crafting, to heal in this game, you also need to craft your food. So similar to Breath of the Wild, essentially, or even Tears of the Kingdom, because some food also grants various buffs, like additional stamina for a short time, for example. But it's the only way you can really heal properly. Campfires are scattered around occasionally to allow this, so you can actually be able to keep healing by cooking when you find these campfires. And with any crafting, you need to find or even buy the recipe to make things. You can't just simply guess combinations, like in Breath of the Wild, for example. And some merchants you will find and help in the outside world before they become available in the main hub, including this cool area with walkways that become visible after you interact with a pretty psychedelic flower. It may be no Super Mario Bros. Wonder though, and that's a great game, but it was a very interesting mechanic all the same. So I guess really to wrap it up, finally for the first impressions, I'm hearing a lot of mixed reception to this title so far. Primarily people are focusing on poor performance and optimization issues, and although I do get some stuttering combat and plenty of FPS drops, or even clipping and slight loading up of assets and stuff, and this is with a 4070, it hasn't really been a deal breaker yet, but I know it will be actively worked on during, once again, early access. And remember, once again, people, early access. And I'm sure a lot of this will be relieved by official launch. So if you're going to play now, please go into it with the mindset that you are testing, you're giving feedback, and please give feedback to developers. They're great developers and they actively want that feedback. They have no reason to not let us trust them yet. So go in with your heart open wide and just try it out, or not. Maybe just simply wait for a while. But I do hope good things for this game as the roadmap progresses, from multiplayer to extra bosses, areas probably. And I do look forward to doing a full review one day, but not this day because there is no rest for the wicked. Take care. Yeah! Down you go, you bastard.